Hello, Soul Stories family. I hope you're all doing well. May God bless you with love, joy, and peace. I pray your days shine bright, your burdens ease, and your dreams come true. How did our last story touch you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly value them. Lately, I've noticed a drop in views, so if these stories have brought you comfort, please invite your loved ones to join us. You're more than subscribers. Your family. Your presence means the world to me. Let's continue this journey together. Late at night, the city lights of London stretched across the ground like shimmering galaxies, reflecting through the glass windows of the towering Whitmore Tower. Inside the top-floor office, Oliver Whitmore stood silently, holding a glass of amber-colored whiskey. His gaze was distant, fixed on the brightly lit streets, but his mind drifted into the past. Just a few years ago, his life had been an unbroken string of successes, a path paved with glory and convenience. Coming from a happy family, Oliver once believed that love was the most beautiful and enduring thing in the world. He had loved wholeheartedly with absolute trust. But Isabella, the woman he had once thought he would spend his life with, had betrayed him in the cruelest way. He vividly remembered that fateful day, the day he walked into their shared apartment and saw Isabella in the arms of another man, his biggest competitor in the industry. Every sweet lie, every promise had merely been tools for her to get close to him and use him. From that moment, Oliver realized that love was a luxury, a game he no longer wanted to play. Now, everything he did was calculated with precision. His heart had turned to ice, and his mind had room only for numbers and contracts. But the dazzling world of the elite wouldn't allow Oliver to hide forever. And then the fateful bet took place. The grand gala at the Ritz Hotel brought together the wealthiest and most powerful figures in the city. Amidst the music and dazzling lights, Oliver carried his usual calm and cold demeanor. He didn't enjoy these parties, but they were opportunities to expand his business network. Beside him, Michael Donovan, his longtime friend from university, took a sip of his drink and smirked. "Alex, are you going to keep that serious face all night? You should learn to enjoy life a little." Oliver swirled his whiskey, his deep voice calm yet indifferent. "I enjoy it in my own way." Michael's lips curled, his eyes glinting mischievously as he nodded towards the far end of the hall, where a group of young women were laughing and chatting. Among them, a woman with chestnut hair stood out. Her striking blue eyes sparkled under the lights, exuding a mix of allure and reckless abandon. "Evelyn Carter," Michael said slowly, watching Oliver's reaction. "She's the nightmare of high society, the wild heiress the tabloids love to chase." Oliver glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "So what?" Michael raised an eyebrow, a sly smile forming. "I bet you can't turn her into a perfect lady in 3 months." Oliver set his glass down, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "And if I do?" $2 million, Michael replied smoothly, his gaze challenging. Oliver knew he was stepping into a dangerous game, but part of him was drawn to the challenge. To him, Evelyn was just a pawn in a bigger scheme, a mere transaction. If he won, he would prove that there was nothing he couldn't control. "Deal," Oliver said decisively, sealing a bet that would change his life in ways he never anticipated. Across the room, Evelyn Carter observed silently. She was no stranger to the scrutinizing glances and whispers surrounding her. As the only daughter of a prestigious family, she had earned a reputation as a true rebel. Endless parties, extravagant shopping sprees, and reckless speeding in sports cars. Everything was a carefully crafted facade to conceal a bitter truth. Since her mother passed away, Evelyn had been living in a cold mansion with her indifferent father and a manipulative stepmother. They never truly cared for her, seeing her only as a tool to further their wealth. And now her father was forcing her into a marriage with a man twice her age for financial gain. She needed an escape, and when Oliver's icy gaze met hers, Evelyn realized she might have found a way out. Marrying Oliver could be her only way to avoid the arranged marriage. Even if she didn't believe in love, this deal might just be her salvation. A week later, in Oliver's luxurious penthouse, Evelyn sat across from him, her expression calm. A meticulously detailed marriage contract lay between them on the table. 3 months? Evelyn arched an eyebrow playfully. And what do I get after that? A sum of money large enough for you to live without ever relying on anyone, Oliver responded firmly, his voice devoid of emotion. Evelyn smirked. Then we have a deal. She signed the contract, and as Oliver watched her elegant signature form, he realized that the real game had just begun. The Grand Imperial Hotel, renowned for hosting the most lavish events in London, was more splendid than ever tonight. White flowers adorned every corner of the Grand Hall, massive crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the soft melody of violins filled the air. The long, elegantly arranged tables welcomed the city's elite, who exchanged curious and intrigued glances. The wedding of Oliver Whitmore, the young millionaire heir to the Whitmore real estate empire, and Evelyn Carter, the notorious wealthy socialite known for her rebellious lifestyle, had been the subject of public fascination for weeks. Although the couple displayed no signs of affection, everyone understood that this was a marriage of convenience rather than love. Oliver stood firmly at the ceremonial altar, impeccably dressed in a classic black tuxedo. His expression remained unreadable, his piercing gaze fixed on the woman slowly walking toward him. Evelyn, adorned in a breathtaking mermaid-style wedding gown by a renowned designer, had eyes as deep as the ocean, reflecting a sorrow she could not disguise. Under the dazzling lights, her beauty appeared ethereal. Yet no one could deny that the same woman who had graced the tabloids with countless scandalous escapades was now stepping into a marriage neither she nor the groom truly desired. Among the guests, whispers filled the air. She's nothing more than a decorative accessory for Oliver. This must be an arranged marriage. Who actually believes they're in love? Evelyn overheard the murmurs, but she remained indifferent. Walking down the flower-lined aisle, she thought only of escaping the marriage her father and stepmother had arranged with another man. Oliver was her only way out, even though she knew he was only marrying her because of a meaningless bet. As their eyes met, both could read the truth in each other's gaze. This was nothing more than a transaction, a loveless deal. The officiant's voice echoed with solemnity, yet his words were met with cold indifference. Do you take this woman to be your wife? Oliver barely hesitated before responding. I do. And do you, Miss Carter, take this man to be your husband? A faint smirk tugged at Evelyn's lips, her voice laced with icy composure. I do. There was no romantic kiss, no affectionate squeeze of hands. Oliver slid the expensive diamond ring onto Evelyn's delicate finger with the precision of someone fulfilling an obligation rather than pledging a lifetime commitment. As the reception commenced, Oliver immersed himself in conversations with business associates, leaving Evelyn alone amidst unfamiliar faces. She held a glass of champagne, taking slow sips while offering forced smiles to the scrutinizing gazes surrounding her. She knew she was nothing more than a glamorous trophy, a tool Oliver used to prove that he could transform a reckless heiress into a perfect wife. And as for Oliver, this was just another game to win. After the hours-long reception, Oliver and Evelyn finally returned to Whitmore Mansion, the grand estate standing like a cold fortress on the banks of the Thames River, its golden lights reflecting on the water like fragments of distant memories. Stepping into the honeymoon suite, Evelyn took in the meticulously arranged space, white roses, scented candles, and sheer silk curtains draped invitingly, creating an atmosphere of undeniable allure. Yet to her, it all felt hollow, devoid of warmth or meaning. She stood by the window, gazing at the dazzling London skyline. Dressed in a white silk gown, her delicate shoulders glowed under the soft light, as if they might vanish at the slightest touch. Behind her, Oliver loosened his tie, his eyes following her every movement, with a mix of curiosity and something he couldn't quite define. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice deep and laced with an unmistakable possessiveness. Shall we start playing the roles of husband and wife? Evelyn turned, her piercing gaze meeting his scrutinizing one. A cold smile played on her lips, devoid of any affection. This role lasts 3 months, doesn't it? She replied, her tone filled with defiance. Oliver smirked, closing the distance between them with deliberate steps. His hand lifted, grazing her cheek, feeling the softness of her skin and the cool detachment beneath her poised expression. He had prepared himself to conquer a reckless socialite, a woman he believed was accustomed to luxury and indulgence. But as he drew closer, Evelyn instinctively took a step back, her eyes flashing a mix of defiance and something else. Mockery. "I think you've misunderstood me," she said softly, her voice calm yet powerful enough to make Oliver pause. His brow arched in intrigue, a rare display of curiosity breaking through his usual composed demeanor. "Oh, then surprise me." Evelyn held his gaze, the depths of her blue eyes unwavering, showing neither fear nor hesitation. "What kind of woman do you think I am, Oliver? A spoiled, easy conquest?" Her question was sharp, cutting through his ego like a blade. For a brief second, Oliver was caught off guard, but he masked it well. Evelyn took another step back, creating a careful distance, though the flicker of pain in her eyes did not escape his notice. "I've never belonged to anyone, and I am not as easy as you think." The revelation hit Oliver like a punch to the gut, sending a wave of shock through his carefully constructed perceptions. His hands, in the middle of undoing his shirt cuffs, froze midair. Evelyn was still a virgin. It was the last thing he had expected from the woman whose name was constantly linked to wild parties and scandalous rumors. A heavy silence settled between them. Evelyn could see the flicker of disbelief in his expression, and she seized the moment, her lips curling into a smirk tinged with irony. "Disappointed?" Oliver remained silent, studying her with an intensity that made the air between them thick with unspoken tension. He had severely misjudged her, and that realization stung more than he cared to admit. "I thought you were smarter than that," Evelyn continued, her voice laced with both bitterness and a vulnerability she tried to hide. Oliver's lips twitched, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. He wasn't used to being wrong, especially about people. He took a step back, his voice lower, more contemplative. "Then why did you agree to marry me?" Evelyn crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes shimmering with a blend of sarcasm and resignation. "Because I needed an escape from the life my father and stepmother arranged for me." She paused, her gaze darkening. "You weren't the perfect choice, but at least you weren't as terrible as the man they picked for me." Oliver felt an unexpected twinge of irritation. He had never considered himself as anyone's second option, let alone a convenient escape plan. His pride bristled at the thought. The room grew quieter, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Evelyn stood still for a long moment before turning away, her shoulders trembling slightly. Yet she maintained her poised exterior, leaving Oliver alone with a whirlwind of thoughts. He watched her retreating figure, for the first time feeling as though he had lost control of a situation he thought he could manipulate. Evelyn was no easy game, no mere accessory he could shape to his liking. She was a mystery, a challenge he had not anticipated, and that made her all the more dangerous to him. Oliver exhaled deeply, leaning against the cool marble wall, his dark eyes fixed on the ceiling. The wedding night had not gone as he had expected. Instead of an effortless victory, he found himself standing at the edge of an intricate chessboard, where Evelyn was no pawn, but a formidable queen in her own right. As for Evelyn staring out at the twinkling city lights, she silently vowed that no one, not even Oliver Whitmore, would ever have the power to dictate her life so easily. Right after the wedding, the Whitmore estate, a magnificent mansion nestled along the banks of the Thames, became the place where Evelyn had to adapt to her new life. The exquisite classical architecture, towering walls adorned with priceless oil paintings, and endless corridors that felt like an inescapable maze. Everything was too perfect, too orderly, too silent, a stark contrast to the vibrant and chaotic life she was used to. Evelyn felt as if she had been imprisoned in a luxurious gilded cage, where freedom was nothing more than a distant dream. Everything in the estate operated like a flawless machine, from meticulously prepared meals to afternoon tea served right on schedule. The household staff worked in silence, their every move filled with cold precision, and Oliver, her husband, was at the center of it all. He didn't need to raise his voice. A single cold glance was enough to ensure absolute compliance. Evelyn had never liked rules, and this marriage was no exception. She continued to make headlines in the tabloids with her late-night parties, endless shopping sprees, and high-speed drives in her luxury sports car, completely ignoring the icy stares of Oliver watching her from a distance. She deliberately provoked him, testing his patience to see where his limits lay. But Oliver was not easily swayed by her antics. He was a man of discipline, always maintaining an unnerving calm in the face of her rebellious acts. Every time she returned home drunk or found herself at the center of yet another scandal, he would simply sit in the library, scan through the bold headlines, then fold the newspaper without a word of reproach. It was this cold, detached silence that frustrated Evelyn the most. Yet beneath the surface, Oliver began to notice something different about his so-called rebellious wife. There was more to her than met the eye, something he hadn't anticipated. One evening, while strolling through the estate, Oliver unexpectedly caught sight of Evelyn in the kitchen, quietly slipping a bundle of cash into the housekeeper's hands. Her voice was soft, but every word carried a rare sincerity. "This is for your son's tuition fees this year. Please don't tell anyone it was from me, okay?" The housekeeper looked at Evelyn with deep gratitude in her eyes, but Evelyn only offered a gentle smile before turning away, as if what she had done was of no significance. Oliver stood silently behind the door, watching everything without revealing his presence. On another occasion, he accidentally discovered Evelyn discussing with the butler about donating a large quantity of warm coats and shoes to an orphanage under the alias of a friend who wishes to remain anonymous. Evelyn never sought recognition or applause for her deeds. She simply carried them out quietly, as if they were second nature. But what surprised Oliver the most was one late night when he saw Evelyn's car pulling up in a rundown neighborhood on the south side of the city. She didn't step into a fancy bar, nor did she attend an elite gathering. Instead, she quietly got out of her car, carrying bags filled with food and warm blankets, which she handed out to the homeless. Under the dim streetlights, she crouched down, listening to their stories, her deep blue eyes filled with genuine empathy. Standing from a distance, Oliver felt a strange sensation stirring within him. So Evelyn wasn't the selfish socialite he had always assumed. There were hidden layers to her, layers of kindness and compassion that she never sought to display for the world to see. Gradually, Oliver's curiosity turned into something else, something he couldn't quite define. He started noticing her more, paying attention to the small details he had previously overlooked. Evelyn, the woman he once thought of as nothing more than a decorative piece in their meaningless bet, was now a mystery he couldn't take his eyes off. Evenings at the mansion slowly began to change. The once silent dinners filled with tension gave way to brief but increasingly frequent conversations. Oliver often found Evelyn sitting by the window, quietly sketching scenes of the city at night. Sometimes he would sit beside her without saying a word. Their shared silence carried no hostility, no barriers, just an unspoken understanding that neither could explain. Evelyn, too, noticed the shift in Oliver's gaze. He no longer looked at her with cold detachment, but with a flicker of something softer, something she couldn't quite define. His attention was no longer obligatory. It felt genuine, as though he was beginning to see her in a new light. Yet she kept her guard up, afraid to believe that their marriage was anything more than a temporary arrangement, a game she couldn't afford to lose. One evening, as they crossed paths in the library, Oliver finally broke the lingering silence between them. "Why do you do all these things without letting anyone know?" he asked. Evelyn paused, setting down the book in her hands. A faint, almost amused smile played on her lips. "Because I don't need recognition," she replied simply. "Helping others makes me feel like I'm not completely useless." Oliver studied her for a long moment, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. For the first time, he realized that Evelyn was nothing like the shallow, reckless woman the tabloids painted her to be. She had depth, hidden wounds, and an unspoken loneliness buried deep within her. And more than anything, she was unlike anyone he had ever met. Somewhere along the way, Oliver found himself no longer viewing Evelyn as a challenge to conquer. Instead, she had become an enigma he wanted to understand. A woman whose allure wasn't in her glamorous appearance, but in her complex and layered soul. And it dawned on him that perhaps their marriage wasn't as simple as he had once thought. Their marriage, which had once seemed like nothing more than a simple contract, began to change in subtle ways that neither of them fully realized. Oliver found himself spending more time observing Evelyn. He noticed that her presence in the mansion didn't just bring trouble, it breathed new life into his otherwise monotonous world. Before Evelyn, the mansion had been nothing more than a grand, lifeless structure. But now the sound of laughter, the occasional arguments, and even her defiant glares made everything feel more alive. Evelyn, too, started to see Oliver in a different light. He wasn't as cold and ruthless as she had once thought. Though he maintained his distance, there was a quiet concern in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. When she was surrounded by a mob of journalists bombarding her with cruel questions, Oliver had appeared, taking her hand and leading her away with a firm resolve, shielding her from the public's scrutiny. Evenings at the mansion gradually transformed. Initially, their conversations were nothing more than polite exchanges, but over time, they began to share pieces of their past. Evelyn told Oliver about her mother, a gentle woman who had passed away when she was young, leaving her alone in the grasp of an indifferent father and a stepmother who cared only for wealth. For the first time, Oliver opened up about his own wounds, the heartbreak of his past relationship with Isabella. What once seemed like the perfect love had ended in betrayal. Evelyn saw the pain in his eyes as he spoke of it, and she realized that beneath his composed exterior was a heart that had never truly healed. Their connection didn't blossom through grand romantic gestures, but through the little things in their daily lives. One afternoon, after a tense business meeting, Oliver walked into the library to find Evelyn engrossed in an economics book, something he never thought would pique her interest. Unaware of his presence, she mumbled thoughtfully to herself, "Why doesn't he invest in social housing projects? I think it would be a smart move." Oliver couldn't help but smile, feeling a strange sense of amusement. The girl he had thought only cared about parties and shopping was capable of such insightful thoughts. Their dinners together, which had once felt forced, gradually became more natural. Evelyn started enjoying the meals prepared by the chef, sometimes playfully toying with her food, while Oliver simply watched, realizing he found himself more interested in observing her than in his work. They began taking quiet strolls through the garden on moonlit nights. Evelyn would excitedly point out different flowers, sharing their meanings and why they were special to her. At first, Oliver merely listened, but soon he found these moments brought him a sense of peace he hadn't known before. Once, when an unexpected rainstorm caught them off guard, they sought shelter under the porch. Evelyn, her hair soaked, laughed brightly, stretching out her hands to catch the raindrops. Oliver watched her, an unfamiliar softness creeping into his gaze. "Don't you find this exciting?" she giggled, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Oliver's voice was quieter than usual as he replied, "Maybe. It's the first time I've found rain so beautiful." Evelyn paused, her heart skipping a beat at his rare moment of sincerity. These small, fleeting moments gradually brought them closer. Evelyn found herself lowering her defenses around Oliver, listening to him more, and slowly understanding the calmness that surrounded him. More importantly, she began to realize how he silently protected her from the harsh whispers of society. For Oliver, what had started as a mere business transaction had transformed into something far more significant. He found himself caring about Evelyn in ways he never expected. Sometimes just a simple smile from her was enough to make his exhausting day feel a little lighter. Love didn't arrive suddenly or dramatically, but rather through the simplest things: late-night conversations, accidental glances, and those quiet moments in the garden where words weren't needed, yet they both understood each other. Evelyn Carter and Oliver Whitmore, two strangers burdened by past wounds, were slowly becoming an inseparable part of each other's lives. The marriage between Evelyn and Oliver, which had seemed to be finding a semblance of peace, was now threatened by unseen forces brewing beneath the surface. Evelyn's stepmother and Oliver's ex-lover, Isabella, had joined forces to shatter the fragile bond between them. One breezy afternoon, Evelyn lounged in a plush armchair by the window of the grand living room, a cigarette dangling lazily between her fingers. Wisps of smoke curled into the air, painting ghostly patterns that faded as quickly as they appeared. Her gaze drifted over the bustling city streets below, detached and indifferent to the world around her. But then, the sharp clack of heels echoed across the polished, wooden floor. Her stepmother entered, carrying a thick envelope in her perfectly manicured hands. She placed it on the table with an all-too-familiar smirk, her eyes gleaming with hidden malice. "Evelyn, do you really think this marriage is about love?" Her voice was smooth, almost a whisper, yet sharp enough to cut through Evelyn's facade. Evelyn exhaled a stream of smoke, her emerald eyes flickering to her stepmother with a look of careless defiance. She swung one leg over the other, her demeanor effortlessly nonchalant, as if none of it mattered. "Here we go again. Another lecture?" she drawled, her tone dripping with boredom. "Make it quick. I have an important appointment to get to." Her stepmother remained unfazed, gracefully pulling out a chair and sitting down across from her. With an air of feigned sympathy, she slid the envelope toward Evelyn, her smile laced with quiet triumph. "I just want you to see the truth, darling. Don't let yourself be deceived by empty illusions." Evelyn glanced at the envelope, then let out a soft chuckle, tapping the cigarette against the rim of her half-empty wineglass. "Oh, let me guess. What's inside? A contract? A blackmail letter? Or perhaps some scandalous photos?" Her voice was laced with mockery, but deep down, a flicker of unease stirred within her. Her stepmother said nothing, simply watching with that infuriating smirk. The silence pressed against Evelyn's chest, making her throat tighten involuntarily. She reached for the envelope and dumped its contents onto the table without much care. The moment her eyes landed on the photos, the smirk on her lips slowly faded. There they were, Oliver and Isabella, seated together in an upscale restaurant. The intimacy in their body language was undeniable. Oliver leaning in slightly, Isabella resting her head on his shoulder, her fingers grazing his wrist in a way that spoke of familiarity and something deeper. Evelyn's heart clenched painfully. She picked up a photo, studying every detail, searching for something, anything, that could disprove the truth staring her in the face. But it was all too clear. Her grip tightened around the edges of the pictures, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of indifference cracked. She had allowed herself to believe, even if just a little, that Oliver had begun to care for her, and now all of that seemed like a cruel joke. Her stepmother shrugged, her tone laced with false sympathy. "Oliver was never truly yours, Evelyn. You're just a temporary distraction for him. If you're smart, you'll know what to do." Evelyn leaned back into the chair, tilting her head as she studied her stepmother with a defiant gleam in her eyes. "And what would you suggest, mother dearest? Should I cry and run away?" "Sorry to disappoint, but I'm not that kind of woman." She forced a smile, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Her stepmother chuckled lightly, rising from her seat. She placed a patronizing hand on Evelyn's shoulder, a final gesture of condescension. "Do what you will, Evelyn. Just don't let yourself become too pitiful." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving behind a faint trail of expensive perfume. Evelyn sat frozen for a moment, staring blankly at the pile of photographs before her. The indifference she had so carefully crafted began to crumble. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced over the image of Oliver looking at Isabella with a tenderness she had never seen directed at herself. Lately, he had been distant, working late nights, missing dinners, ignoring her calls. She had convinced herself it was just work, that Oliver was simply the cold, detached man he had always been. But now it all made sense. The late nights, the silence, the absence. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. The rebellious, carefree Evelyn Carter had actually allowed herself to believe in something as foolish as love. She shook her head, pouring herself another glass of wine and downing it in one go, hoping the alcohol would dull the ache in her chest. But no amount of liquor could erase the image of Oliver and Isabella that now burned itself into her mind. She rose abruptly, pulling back the heavy curtains to gaze out at the dazzling city skyline. The glittering lights of London, the endless stream of people, everything kept moving forward. Yet she felt stuck at a crossroads with nowhere to go. Her grip tightened on the curtain, her breathing ragged. She knew she had to make a choice, but did she have the strength to walk away from it all? Picking up her phone, Evelyn's fingers hovered over Oliver's contact. She hesitated, her thumb wavering over the screen, before she let out a quiet, bitter sigh and tossed the phone onto the couch. If Oliver truly cared, he would have to prove it himself. As for her, perhaps it was time to leave, like a storm that refused to be tamed by anyone. While Evelyn struggled with the turmoil in her heart, Oliver found himself facing a far more tangible threat. Isabella had not only returned to disrupt his marriage, but she had set her sights on his career as well. One late evening, while Oliver was buried in work at his office, Isabella appeared unannounced, her sharp gaze prowling like a predator. "We need to talk, Alex." She seated herself without invitation, sliding a thick folder across the desk toward him. "If you don't want your company to collapse, you know what you have to do." Oliver opened the folder, his face an unreadable mask as he skimmed through the contents. Isabella had already lured several key stakeholders to her side, orchestrating a financial crisis that could bring Whitmore Enterprises to its knees. But what made his blood run cold was her thinly veiled threat aimed at Evelyn. "If you don't want your precious wife to have an accident anytime soon, I suggest you think carefully." Isabella's voice dripped with venom, her eyes dark with malice. Oliver clenched his fists, struggling to keep his composure. He knew Isabella well enough to understand that she never made empty threats. Rumors of a major investor pulling out of the company had already begun to circulate, causing unrest among the shareholders. The pressure was mounting, and Oliver found himself standing at a crossroad between saving his company and protecting the woman who had unexpectedly found a place in his heart. The situation reached a breaking point when a major investor suddenly announced their withdrawal from a crucial project, sending shockwaves through the company. The financial reports painted a dire picture: stocks plummeting, red figures flashing across the screens, and emergency meetings stretching late into the night. Oliver practically lived in his office, fighting tooth and nail to stabilize the empire his family had built over the years. Sleepless nights became his new normal, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like never before. Despite his efforts to shield Evelyn from the chaos, the growing distance between them did not go unnoticed. Oliver's absence from home, his late-night phone calls, and the relentless exhaustion etched into his features, all of it fed into Evelyn's growing doubts. Each passing day, she found herself questioning if the words her stepmother had whispered to her were true. Evelyn's growing doubts were only fueled by Oliver's increasing distance. The malicious words of her stepmother suddenly seemed more plausible than ever. Oliver had become colder, more distant, and the lonely dinners in the vast mansion made her feel like nothing more than an accessory. She began to question if she was indeed just a plaything in his grand scheme, as her stepmother had so cruelly suggested. One afternoon, in search of some fresh air and an escape from her thoughts, Evelyn found herself in a quiet cafe by the roadside. As she sipped her coffee absent-mindedly, she overheard a group of Whitmore employees seated at a nearby table, engaged in a hushed but intense conversation. They were discussing the dire state of the company, the looming threat of bankruptcy, and Oliver's relentless efforts to secure a financial solution. Evelyn's heart nearly stopped when she heard one of them say, "If we don't secure new investment within a week, we're all out of jobs." Those words echoed in her mind, repeating over and over like a relentless drumbeat. She stood frozen, the bustling city noise fading into a distant hum as the realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Oliver wasn't distant because he was tired of her or because of the wager she had long suspected. He was fighting a silent war to save his company, to protect thousands of employees. A wave of guilt washed over Evelyn, tightening around her chest like an iron grip. She had been so absorbed in her own insecurities and doubts that she had failed to notice the burden Oliver was shouldering. She recalled the long nights he spent at the office, the fatigue etched into his face, and the silent stares that she had mistaken for indifference. But now everything made perfect sense. He was struggling, fighting, and he had been doing it alone. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the edge of the chair, trying to steady herself against the flood of emotions rushing through her. She had judged him too harshly, let her insecurities cloud her vision, and turned her back on him when he needed her most. For so long, Evelyn had believed that she was the loneliest person in the world. But now she realized that Oliver's solitude was just as profound. His was the loneliness of responsibility, the weight of expectations crushing down on him. Taking a deep breath, her resolve hardened. She couldn't just stand by anymore, not out of obligation or guilt, but because she cared, deeply, undeniably. The man she once thought she despised had, without her realizing it, carved a place in her heart. She knew what she had to do. It was time to prove to everyone, and to herself, that she wasn't just a reckless socialite, a girl with no purpose beyond fleeting pleasures. Evelyn decided to use the inheritance her mother had left her, an untouched fortune she had always guarded closely, to save Oliver's company. Not because he needed her help, but because she wanted to be his silent strength, just as he had been hers in ways she hadn't noticed before. With newfound determination, Evelyn left the cafe, her steps firm, her gaze unwavering. The doubts and fears that had plagued her were gone, replaced by a singular purpose: to stand by Oliver and face whatever came their way together. Without wasting another moment, she returned to the Whitmore estate, heading straight to her study. Pulling out her financial records, she stared at the vast wealth her mother had left behind. The money had always been a reminder of her past, of the love she once had, and she had never touched it out of respect and longing. But now it could serve a greater purpose. Evelyn picked up the phone, her voice calm yet resolute as she spoke to her lawyer. "Transfer a significant portion of my inheritance to Whitmore Group. I want it done immediately, no delays." The lawyer hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by her sudden interest in serious financial matters. Evelyn had always been known for her lavish spending, never for her business acumen. But she simply smirked at his hesitation, her tone unwavering as she continued. "This isn't an impulsive decision. I know exactly what I'm doing." That very night, the funds were transferred. Evelyn didn't inform Oliver. She knew he would never accept her help easily, and she didn't need him to. This wasn't about his pride or her validation. It was about standing in the shadows, being the silent pillar he could lean on without even realizing it. As she stared out of the window into the dark city skyline, Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was finally doing something that mattered, not just for him, but for them. The next day at the Whitmore Group headquarters, news of the mysterious investment spread like wildfire across departments. Oliver sat in the boardroom with the senior shareholders, his face composed as always, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise. A substantial sum had just been transferred into the struggling project fund, enough to sustain operations for the coming months and even aid in restructuring their business strategy. "You've really outdone yourself, Oliver. I didn't expect you'd be able to secure such a large investment in such a short time," an older shareholder remarked, nodding approvingly. Oliver clenched his hands beneath the table, his mind racing with questions. He knew without a doubt that he had not yet found a new investor, and this money couldn't have appeared out of thin air. The timely intervention of the investment had pulled Whitmore Group back from the brink of collapse. Key projects were restarted, shareholders regained confidence, and the market slowly showed signs of recovery. While the company was stabilizing, Oliver was left with one pressing question. Who was behind this mysterious investment? He had combed through every financial record, contacted potential partners, yet no clues surfaced. The only detail left behind was a simple signature, E. Carter. It couldn't possibly be Evelyn, he thought. In his eyes, she was still the reckless socialite, uninterested in finance or business affairs. Yet a nagging thought gnawed at the back of his mind. Could it really be her? Meanwhile, Isabella was seething with rage upon discovering that her plan to ruin Oliver had failed. She had underestimated Evelyn, a costly mistake. Worse yet, Oliver had not abandoned his wife, which deeply wounded Isabella's pride. In a fit of fury, she decided to take more drastic action. Late one evening, after attending a charity event, Evelyn was on her way back to the Whitmore estate when a speeding truck suddenly veered into her lane from the opposite direction. There was no time to react. The truck collided forcefully with the side of her car, sending it spinning into the guardrail. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The car flipped onto its side, shards of glass scattered everywhere, and blood trickled down Evelyn's pale face. Before losing consciousness, only one thought crossed her mind. Oliver's smile. At the hospital, Oliver sat silently beside Evelyn's hospital bed, his usually composed demeanor shattered. Her face was ghostly pale, a deep gash on her forehead standing in stark contrast to her otherwise flawless skin. He reached for her hand, his own trembling with a mix of fear and regret. "What have you done to yourself, Evelyn?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The past few days he had been consumed by work, battling the financial crisis orchestrated by Isabella. But now, sitting beside Evelyn's still body, Oliver realized how insignificant the company was compared to her. The door creaked open, and George, his assistant, entered with a thick file in hand. His expression was tense, his eyes filled with urgency. "Mr. Whitmore, there's something you need to know," George said, placing the file on the table. Oliver flipped through the pages quickly, his sharp gaze freezing when he saw the name of the new investor, Evelyn Carter. His breath caught in his throat, his grip tightening on the papers, as every transaction, every financial trail confirmed the truth. Evelyn was the one who had saved his company. "This can't be," Oliver murmured, memories flashing through his mind. Her exhausted eyes when he came home late, the disappointment that flickered across her face when he grew distant. George cleared his throat, his voice cautious. "Mrs. Whitmore made the investment through an anonymous financial trust. She didn't want you to know." Oliver's hands trembled as he held the documents. She had sacrificed everything without expecting recognition. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, filling his chest with both pain and an overwhelming sense of love. He gently brushed a strand of hair from Evelyn's face, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with guilt and tenderness. "Why did you do this for me without saying a word? I've been so blind, Evelyn. I didn't see that you were always there for me." All the walls he had built around himself, all the emotions he had buried, threatened to spill over. He had been so focused on fighting Isabella that he had neglected the one person who truly cared for him. Staring at Evelyn's frail figure, Oliver felt an ache unlike any he had ever known. He had let her feel alone, left her drowning in doubts and insecurities, while she silently stood by his side, protecting him in ways he never imagined. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. Please, wake up." He leaned closer, pressing a soft kiss to her cold hand. Though she remained in a coma, Oliver knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never let her slip away again. From this moment on, he was determined to protect and cherish her with everything he had. When sitting beside Evelyn's hospital bed, watching her lying unconscious, a fire of fury ignited within Oliver. He couldn't just sit back and watch the woman he loved suffer without taking action. The incident was too much of a coincidence to be an accident. Isabella had always been ruthless, and this time Oliver knew she had crossed the line. "George, I want you to conduct a thorough investigation into Evelyn's accident," Oliver said, his voice cold and sharp. "Check all traffic cameras, find any irregularities. I need to know who dared to do this." George nodded without hesitation. He knew Oliver meant every word. Within a day, information started coming to light. The private investigation team Oliver had hired uncovered crucial evidence. A hidden security camera from a nearby street captured footage of a suspicious black car tailing Evelyn's vehicle just moments before the accident. The license plate was quickly traced back to a rental company, and the person who had signed the lease was none other than Isabella. Oliver's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening with fury. This time she had gone too far, and he wouldn't let it slide. "I want solid evidence to bring her to justice." George wasted no time, gathering witness statements from people near the scene. A homeless man had seen the black car accelerating toward Evelyn's vehicle, and fortunately had scribbled down the plate number on an old piece of paper. With all the evidence in hand, Oliver didn't hesitate. He immediately called his legal team and contacted the police to initiate a formal investigation. That morning, as Isabella enjoyed her luxurious breakfast at a high-end hotel, she was caught off guard when several police officers barged in. Her face turned pale as she saw Oliver walking in alongside the officers. He stood tall, his gaze icy cold. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out the truth?" His voice was like a blade, cutting through the air. Isabella attempted to remain composed, but the steely authority and resentment in Oliver's eyes made her falter. "Oliver, what are you talking about? I don't understand." She feigned innocence, but it was already too late. One of the officers stepped forward and read the arrest warrant aloud. "Isabella Grayson, you are under arrest for attempted homicide and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. You have the right to remain silent, but anything you say can and will be used against you in court." Isabella screamed, struggling in vain as the officers handcuffed her. She turned to Oliver, desperation and anger swirling in her eyes. You can't do this to me. We loved each other, Alex. Oliver stepped closer, looking directly into her deceitful eyes. Love, he scoffed. I once loved you, but that love died the day you betrayed me. Now you're nothing but a pathetic criminal. As the police led Isabella away, Oliver stood still, his heart heavy. He knew the battle wasn't entirely over, but at least the person who hurt Evelyn would finally face the consequences. After ensuring that Isabella was prosecuted by the law, Oliver immediately returned to the hospital. He sat down beside Evelyn's bed, holding her hand tightly, and whispered, "Can you hear me, Evelyn? I found the one behind all of this. You're safe now." His voice was hoarse, filled with tenderness, yet laced with pain. He realized he loved her far more than he had ever admitted to himself. Evelyn had done so much for him, and yet he had let her fall into danger. A single tear slid down Oliver's cheek. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. Please, wake up. Give me a chance to make things right." Under the soft hospital lighting, Evelyn's fingers faintly twitched. One early morning, as gentle sunlight streamed through the hospital window, illuminating Evelyn's pale face, Oliver sat beside her, his eyes weary but unwavering. His hand remained tightly wrapped around hers, feeling the faint but steady pulse beneath her skin. Suddenly, her slender fingers moved slightly. Her eyelids fluttered before slowly opening, meeting Oliver's worried yet loving gaze. Time seemed to stand still for a moment before her weak voice broke the silence. You're here?" Oliver held his breath, his heart skipping a beat at the fragile sound of her voice. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, but he quickly composed himself, squeezing her hand gently. "Yes, I'm here. I'll always be here." Evelyn tried to smile, but her lips trembled. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself feel the warmth of his presence. Memories flooded back, the accident, the doubts, the hurt. But now, looking into his eyes, all the pain seemed to fade away. "You know now, don't you?" she whispered, her gaze filled with sorrow, yet no longer avoiding his. Oliver nodded, his voice thick with emotion but resolute. I know it was you who saved the company, who stood behind me when I was too blind to see." Evelyn smiled faintly, though tears welled in her eyes. "I just wanted to help you because I knew you'd never accept it if I told you outright." Oliver squeezed her hand tighter, emotions overwhelming him. Once he had thought of her as nothing more than a reckless socialite, but now he saw Evelyn as the strong, compassionate woman she truly was. "I was wrong, Evelyn. I was so blind not to trust you, not to share my burdens with you. I'm sorry for making you bear everything alone." Evelyn gazed into his eyes, seeing the sincerity, the regret, and the deep love he held for her. In that moment, she knew he was genuine. "You know, I once thought leaving you would be the best choice, but deep down I couldn't. I love you, Oliver." Oliver couldn't hold back anymore. He leaned down, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead, tears falling freely. "I love you, Evelyn. I have for a long time. I just didn't have the courage to admit it." Evelyn smiled, her eyes shimmering in the morning light. They had endured misunderstandings and heartbreak, but what mattered was that they were here, together. A few months later, Evelyn had fully recovered. Throughout her recovery, Oliver never left her side for even a moment. Their love grew stronger, with no more secrets or distance standing between them. Today, Evelyn stood on stage at a major charity event she had been quietly planning for months. She looked elegant in a sophisticated gown, no longer the rebellious heiress of the past, but a mature, independent woman with unwavering determination. As she stepped onto the stage, her eyes instinctively searched for him, and there he was, standing in the far corner of the room, watching her with quiet pride. He didn't need to say anything. His smile spoke volumes. His gaze was filled with love, admiration, and immense pride. Evelyn took a deep breath, her voice steady as she spoke into the microphone. "I was once a lost girl, unsure of my place in this world, but I've learned that love, trust, and compassion are what make life truly meaningful." From the audience, Oliver gave her a small nod, his heart swelling with happiness. He had found not just a wife in Evelyn, but a partner, an equal, and above all, the love of his life. On a gentle evening, as the London sky was adorned with a shimmering blanket of stars, Oliver led Evelyn to the small garden behind the Whitmore estate. The soft golden lights illuminated the blooming roses, creating a breathtakingly romantic scene. Evelyn stood there, her long hair cascading down in the evening breeze, her eyes still carrying traces of the sorrow she had endured. Oliver gazed at her, his heart brimming with love and a deep sense of regret. "Evelyn," he finally broke the silence, his voice warm and sincere. She turned to face him, her piercing blue eyes filled with curiosity. "I proposed to you once before, but for all the wrong reasons. Tonight I want to do it again, but this time, for the only reason that truly matters." Oliver slowly knelt down, pulling out a small red velvet box from his pocket. Inside, a diamond ring sparkled under the moonlight. Gone was the coldness, gone were the obligations and the bet. Only pure, heartfelt love remained in his gaze. "Evelyn Carter, can you forgive me and give us another chance? I love you, not because of a wager, not out of duty, but because of who you are. You've changed my life in ways I never imagined. I want to be with you, love you, and protect you for the rest of my life." Evelyn stood still, her breath caught in her throat, tears welling in her eyes. Not tears of pain this time, but of happiness. She had been through so much, so many misunderstandings, but at this moment, she could feel the raw sincerity in Oliver's words. A gentle smile formed on her lips, one that held happiness and a multitude of emotions. Slowly, she reached out her hand, her voice soft yet resolute. "I accept, Oliver. Let's start over, with real love." Relief washed over Oliver's face, and a radiant smile spread across his lips as he slid the ring onto Evelyn's finger. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as if silently vowing never to let her go again. "Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you for giving me another chance." Evelyn rested her head against his chest, closing her eyes, savoring the strong, steady heartbeat and the comforting warmth of the man she loved. "We'll face everything together." Under the starlit sky, they shared a tender kiss, marking a new beginning. No more pretense, no more doubts, only genuine love and hope for the future. Their story stands as proof that love is not a game or a possession, but understanding and companionship. No matter the past, people always have the chance to change and find true happiness if they are willing to fight for it and cherish what they have. Thank you for following our story. Did this story touch your heart? Leave a comment below. If you enjoyed David Blackwood, a cold and ruthless CEO, a man admired by the world for his intelligence and business acumen. However, beneath that glamorous exterior lies a soul scarred by pain and resentment. As a child, David once had a happy family until a woman named Madeline Carter, Evelyn's mother, stepped into his parents' marriage. That illicit affair shattered his home, leaving his mother devastated and ultimately passing away in loneliness. The memories of countless sleepless nights by his mother's sickbed continue to haunt him. David has never forgotten her tears, and now he believes that revenge is the only way to fill the void in his heart. He had waited for years, tracking every move of Madeline Carter, but fate opened a new door when he discovered her daughter, Evelyn Carter, an innocent and kind-hearted woman. A cruel plan gradually took shape. He would destroy Evelyn just as her mother had destroyed his family. Evelyn Carter, a diligent office worker, leads a simple yet resilient life. She lives in a small apartment with her mother, the person she loves most in the world. Evelyn never had a wealthy or luxurious childhood, but she is proud of her mother, the woman she believes single-handedly raised her with tireless effort over the years. To Evelyn, life is a cycle of long working hours and caring for her sick mother at night. She is completely unaware that the mother she reveres is the reason for the tragedy in the life of the man she is about to marry. Evelyn lives under the constant stress of mounting medical bills. She is exhausted from working full-time while tending to her mother every day. The only thing keeping her going is the belief that somehow she will overcome it all. When David discovers that Evelyn is the daughter of the woman who destroyed his family, he decides to ruin her life in the most ruthless way, through a loveless marriage, trapping her within her own dreams. He wants Evelyn to experience the same despair his mother once did, to watch her fall to her knees and beg him, only to be discarded without mercy. With meticulous calculations, David begins to approach Evelyn. He presents himself as a charming gentleman, offering her warmth she had never experienced before. Through small gifts, lavish dinners, and his irresistible presence, he gradually wins her trust. David makes Evelyn believe that she is special, the only woman who could enter his world. But behind his charming smile lies a dark plan only he knows. The fateful day arrives sooner than Evelyn expected. In an upscale restaurant, under the glow of twinkling lights, David proposes to her with a sparkling diamond ring and a promise to take care of her financial burdens and provide for her mother's treatment. His eyes are filled with tenderness, but deep inside, they hold an unreadable coldness. Evelyn is stunned. She cannot believe that such a perfect man would choose her, an ordinary girl with a difficult life. But when she thinks of her mother, of the endless hospital visits and the fear of losing the only family she has, she cannot refuse. David's proposal feels like a lifeline, helping her hold onto the last glimmer of hope for her mother. Evelyn agrees, but her heart whispers that something isn't right. Their wedding is an overwhelming spectacle of opulence, becoming the talk of the elite. Evelyn, adorned in a stunning wedding gown, stands before the mirror in a gold-adorned room, yet her heart feels empty. Since accepting David's proposal, everything has moved too quickly. Dress fittings, venue selections, and guest lists, all arranged by him. Evelyn feels like a doll placed in her position, without a say in anything. The grand ballroom sparkles with crystal chandeliers, pristine white flowers lining the aisle, and hundreds of guests eagerly awaiting the couple's vows. But amidst the grandeur, Evelyn only feels an unbearable coldness. David stands at the altar, impeccably dressed in a black suit, his face devoid of emotion except for a faint, calculated smile. His hand is ice cold as he takes Evelyn's, sending shivers down her spine. When the officiant asks, "Do you, David Blackwood, take Evelyn Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The comma David merely nods, his deep voice resonating with a chilling indifference. "I do." Evelyn's vows tremble as she speaks. "I do." Applause erupts, cheers fill the air, but Evelyn feels like she is trapped in a gilded cage. Looking into David's eyes, she finds no love, only an invisible distance, and the nagging sense that she is merely a pawn in his game. Will Evelyn uncover the truth behind this marriage? And will David truly achieve his revenge? Welcome, dear members of the Soul Stories family, to today's tale. Please subscribe to the channel and become part of this growing family. Let us know which city you're following the story from. The wedding night of Evelyn and David unfolded in an atmosphere thick with tension, not the kind born of excitement or anticipation, but of cold distance and unspoken conflict. Evelyn, draped in a pristine silk gown, her face tinged with melancholy, knew all too well that this marriage was not born out of love. It was merely an unspoken agreement, a path she had been forced to take for the sake of her ailing mother. Yet despite her awareness of the harsh reality, her heart could not help but feel the sting of betrayal. David stood before Evelyn, his sharp gaze scanning every delicate feature of her face. He looked at her not with the tenderness of a newlywed husband, but with the eyes of a predator who had finally ensnared his prey. There was no rush in his movements. He approached her slowly, deliberately, studying every flicker of emotion that crossed her face. To him, this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment she would crumble before him, just as her mother had once shattered his family. However, the instant his hand touched her soft skin for the first time, he felt a genuine tremor beneath his fingertips. Her clear, innocent eyes held a quiet apprehension, devoid of the cunning or deceit he had always assumed she possessed. And then, when the decisive moment arrived, David froze. Evelyn was still a virgin. A wave of shock crashed over him, catching him off guard in a way he had never anticipated. He had always believed Evelyn to be just like her mother, a woman skilled in seduction, using her beauty to achieve her goals. But the truth before him was completely different. Evelyn had never belonged to anyone, had never used her charm to gain anything. She was far more innocent and pure than he had ever imagined. This unexpected revelation stirred something within him, something unsettling and foreign. Evelyn, noticing the conflict in David's eyes, did not understand why he hesitated. She had braced herself for his inevitable possession, for the ruthless dominance she expected from him. But instead, he simply lay beside her, maintaining a careful distance. That night, David did not touch her, as she had feared. Instead, he lay in silence, staring at the ceiling, his mind swirling with thoughts he could not yet comprehend. In the days that followed, the tension between them remained palpable. David continued to maintain his cold, distant demeanor, yet deep inside he couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn. He found himself observing her more closely, noticing the small, thoughtful gestures that had once escaped his attention. Evelyn remained gentle and caring, despite his emotional distance. She quietly prepared breakfast for him each morning, placing his cup exactly the way he liked it, without needing to ask. She gently reminded him to take his coat whenever the weather turned chilly. One evening, after an exhausting day at work, David returned home with a pounding headache. Without a word, Evelyn placed a steaming cup of ginger tea before him. The soothing aroma filled the air, and when he looked at her, he saw no calculation, only genuine care. He couldn't comprehend why Evelyn continued to treat him with such kindness when he had offered her nothing but cold indifference. Despite his attempts to remain detached, David began to feel subtle changes stirring within him. Every time he watched Evelyn care for her mother, her soft smiles and the worry in her eyes gnawed at him. It unsettled him to realize that he was beginning to care. He tried to ignore the nagging urge to protect her, to shield her from pain. But with each passing day, that urge grew stronger. Slowly, David realized that his satisfaction with his revenge plan was beginning to wane. Instead of feeling triumphant, he started to feel guilty when he saw Evelyn enduring his coldness with quiet resilience. The anger that had once fueled him was no longer directed at her, but at himself. He could no longer ignore the growing conflict in his heart. Why did he suddenly feel the need to protect Evelyn when his original plan had been to break her? The lines between revenge and something deeper were beginning to blur, and David found himself standing at a crossroads he never anticipated. One evening, when Evelyn returned home after a long day at the hospital taking care of her mother, she looked more exhausted than ever. David stood at a distance, watching her with an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He saw her frail shoulders trembling with fatigue, yet she still carried herself with quiet strength. She never complained, never blamed him for his coldness. She simply did what needed to be done, without expecting anything in return. And that realization weighed heavily on him in ways he couldn't quite explain. That night, as Evelyn drifted into sleep, David sat by her bedside, his gaze softer than it had ever been before. He reached out, wanting to brush his fingers against her delicate face, but at the last moment, he pulled his hand back. He didn't want to let himself go too far. He was afraid of his own emotions. If he allowed himself to love her, it would mean abandoning the hatred, the revenge he had carefully nurtured for years. Evelyn remained unaware of David's inner turmoil. To her, he was still the distant, indifferent husband who had married her out of necessity. But in the moments she didn't see, David had begun to change. He found himself watching her more often, feeling uneasy whenever she looked sad. She was no longer just a tool for his revenge. She was becoming someone he respected, someone he admired. Yet David couldn't face his feelings, couldn't admit that his heart was beginning to soften for Evelyn. This internal struggle left David more withdrawn than ever. He didn't know what to do with the emotions stirring inside him. He began staying at work late, avoiding Evelyn even more. Yet no matter how much he tried to distance himself, thoughts of her lingered in his mind. The walls David had built to protect himself were slowly crumbling. He realized that one day he would have to choose between revenge and love, between the past and the present. But did he have the courage to face that truth? As time passed in their cold, loveless marriage, Evelyn's only concern was her mother. The cruel disease was slowly taking away her mother's life, and with each passing day, she grew weaker. Evelyn did everything she could, running back and forth between work and the hospital, clinging to the faint hope that she could somehow extend her mother's time. But the illness progressed relentlessly, like a candle slowly flickering out in the face of an inevitable storm. Her mother's final days were a constant cycle of worry and despair for Evelyn. She had once dreamed of a peaceful life for her mother, a life free of worries and pain. But now all she could do was hold on to her mother's frail hand, silently praying for a miracle she knew would never come. One evening, as David returned home from work, the house was enveloped in a heavy, suffocating silence. His steps halted at the doorway of the bedroom, where the dim glow of the bedside lamp cast weak, flickering light. He saw Evelyn sitting motionless by her mother's bedside, her eyes swollen and red, her face etched with unbearable sorrow. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks, and her trembling lips whispered, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I couldn't do anything more." Madeline Carter had passed away in her sleep, leaving this world in quiet resignation, free from its endless struggles and pain. Evelyn sat frozen, her eyes hollow, her body lifeless like a statue. She held onto her mother's cold hand as if letting go would mean losing her forever. David stood in the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the woman he had once despised crumble before him. Her heart was shattered beyond repair, and what surprised him the most was the unexpected ache in his own chest. Evelyn had lost the only family she had, and for the first time in his life, he felt a deep sense of regret for his cruelty, for his presence in her life that had only brought more pain. From that day forward, something within David shifted. He no longer looked at Evelyn through the lens of revenge, but with a quiet empathy he never thought himself capable of. The love he had unknowingly developed for her began to outweigh the hatred he had harbored for so long. His desire for vengeance was slowly replaced by an urge to comfort and protect. David found himself staying closer to Evelyn, no longer distant and indifferent. He prepared meals for her, placed a warm blanket around her shoulders when she sat by the window for hours, lost in memories. He didn't offer words of comfort. He knew they would be meaningless, but his silent presence spoke volumes. One night, when Evelyn broke down into heart-wrenching sobs, David no longer kept his distance. Instead, he pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his chest. "I'm here, Evelyn. You're not alone," he whispered, his voice carrying none of the cold detachment it once did. Evelyn didn't know when it happened, but the man she once thought incapable of warmth had become her only source of comfort. The tenderness he showed her, though unspoken, seeped into the cracks of her broken heart. David, on the other hand, could no longer bear the thought of hurting Evelyn. Seeing her frail figure, her empty gaze, and the quiet strength she still carried, he felt like the worst kind of man. The rage and thirst for revenge that once consumed him now seemed trivial compared to the weight of Evelyn's sorrow. In those moments of silence and grief, David realized something profound. He was no longer fighting for revenge. He was fighting the overwhelming desire to love her, to take away her pain, and to mend the heart he had once intended to break. During the days when Evelyn was exhausted by the loss of her mother, David was the only one by her side. He no longer watched her from a distance, but quietly stayed close, taking care of her in the only way he knew how. In the mornings, he would silently place a warm cup of tea on her desk. In the evenings, he prepared simple meals, knowing well that she would hardly eat. When Evelyn sat motionless by the window through the night, lost in memories, David would drape a warm blanket over her shoulders without saying a word. For the first time, Evelyn felt his quiet concern. Not cold, not controlling, but genuine and tender, in a way she had never expected from him. On the nights when grief overwhelmed her, and she could no longer hold back her tears, David would sit beside her without speaking. And when she could no longer contain the sobs racking her body, he reached out, gently pulling her into his arms. "I'm here, Evelyn. You're not alone." His voice no longer carried the icy detachment of the past, but a rare gentleness that caught her off guard. Evelyn had once believed that this man was incapable of love, incapable of empathy, but his patience and quiet presence had slowly crept into the cracks of her broken heart. David never thought he would become a source of comfort for Evelyn. Yet seeing her fragile figure, the emptiness in her eyes and the coldness of her trembling hands, he felt like a sinner. The hatred he had once clung to now seemed insignificant in the face of Evelyn's real, raw suffering. Slowly he realized he could no longer bring himself to hurt her. Each time he saw her drained and vulnerable, he felt as though he had pushed too far down the path of revenge, forgetting that the human heart had its limits. There were nights when Evelyn fell asleep with swollen eyes and David would quietly sit beside her, his gaze filled with sorrow and regret. "Evelyn, I'm sorry." The words were whispered so softly that even he wasn't sure if she could hear them. As time passed, though no words of love were spoken, Evelyn gradually sensed a change in David. He was no longer the man who sought to destroy her. Instead, he had become someone who truly cared for her, someone who worried about her and because of her. One morning as Evelyn woke up, she found David sitting by her bedside, having dozed off from exhaustion. For the first time she realized that he was just a man, not the cold machine of vengeance she had once believed him to be. The sight of him, his usually sharp features softened by sleep, stirred something unfamiliar within her, a tenderness she hadn't expected. Deep inside Evelyn, something was beginning to shift. Perhaps the quiet gentleness he showed, though never put into words, had slowly started to seep into her heart. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, like a flicker of warmth in the midst of the cold reality they had shared. And from that moment on, she no longer felt as alone as she once did. Evelyn's grief over losing her mother still lingered, making her feel as if she were living in a world without light. Each passing day, she drowned in loneliness and regret. However, with David's silent support, she gradually returned to her daily routine. She continued her work, trying to focus on the small things to keep herself from breaking down. One afternoon, while tidying up David's study, Evelyn accidentally found an envelope lying on his desk. It was plain, nothing remarkable about it except for her name, Evelyn Carter, written on the front in David's familiar, firm handwriting. She hesitated for a moment, an inexplicable unease rising within her. David had changed so much in recent days, becoming more gentle and attentive, but a lingering doubt still gnawed at her heart, an invisible fear she had never dared to confront. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope, and as the pages slipped out, her eyes froze on the bold heading at the top of the first page. Objective: destroy Evelyn Carter so that her mother suffers the same pain mine did. Evelyn stood frozen. She couldn't believe her eyes. Each word on the page felt like a cold, sharp dagger piercing straight into her heart. She flipped through the pages, her eyes widening in horror as she read through the meticulously detailed plan David had devised. From his calculated approach to win her trust to forcing her into a marriage she thought was built on love, everything had been part of his cruel revenge plot. Her world crumbled around her, but the most painful blow came from a separate document lying at the bottom of the pile, an extensive report about her mother, Madeline Carter. Evelyn picked it up, her eyes fixated on the merciless words written in black ink. Madeline Carter, the woman who destroyed my family's happiness and drove my mother to a life of misery until the very end. Her heart clenched painfully. She couldn't believe what she was reading. Her mother, the woman she had loved and cared for all her life, was the reason behind the destruction of David's family. Had all the tragedies he endured stemmed from her mother's actions? Evelyn took a step back, her breathing uneven. She could no longer deny the truth. Those documents in her hands confirmed it. A wave of agony washed over her. She had always been proud of her mother, believing she had raised her alone with strength and dignity. But now she realized that the very person she admired had been the catalyst for the suffering of the man she had unknowingly come to love. Just then, David entered the room. He stopped in his tracks, his expression darkening when he saw Evelyn standing there, her face pale, her eyes filled with heartbreak and devastation. Evelyn, what are you doing?" David's voice faltered, his hands clenching, when he realized what she was holding. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him with eyes brimming with betrayal and pain. Taking a deep breath, she tried to hold back the sobs threatening to escape. "Was everything just a lie?" she asked, her voice breaking, trembling hands holding the documents out to him. David remained silent. He couldn't bring himself to deny it. He had always known this moment would come, but he had never expected it to hurt this much. Seeing the tears roll down Evelyn's face felt like an invisible hand tightening around his heart. She stared at him for a long moment, her gaze searching for something, anything, that could refute the truth she had just uncovered. But there was nothing. With a voice thick with emotion, she finally whispered, "I'm sorry." David's breath caught in his throat. I'm sorry for my mother. I didn't know what she did to your family, but I never wanted to hurt you." Her sincere apology stunned him. She had no knowledge of the past, yet she was apologizing for the sins of someone else. Guilt churned within David, but he couldn't bring himself to say a word. Without another glance, Evelyn turned and fled the room, leaving David standing there, consumed by the crushing weight of his remorse. That night, Evelyn quietly packed her belongings. Every item she placed into the suitcase felt like a painful shard of memory cutting into her heart. She couldn't stay in this house for another second. Her heart was shattered, and she could no longer bear to live in a place built on deception and lies. But deep down, she carried a secret, one she hadn't had the chance to share yet. She was pregnant. Evelyn had discovered her pregnancy weeks ago, but she had never found the right moment to tell David. She had planned to wait for the perfect time, a moment when they could sit down and talk about their future. But now, after everything she had uncovered about him, she couldn't let their child grow up in a home filled with revenge and falsehood. Standing before the mirror, Evelyn gently placed a hand on her still flat stomach, tears streaming down her face. "I will protect you, my love. I won't let anyone hurt you." Her voice was a whisper, a promise filled with both love and sorrow. She knew leaving wouldn't be easy. Stepping away from the life she had once believed in, from the man she had begun to love despite everything, felt like tearing a part of herself away. But she had to go. She had to leave behind the pain, the betrayal, and all the shattered dreams that came with them. With a deep breath, Evelyn zipped up her suitcase, wiping away her tears. She was determined to start anew, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. As dawn broke and the city remained shrouded in a misty haze, Evelyn quietly left the grand mansion, dragging a small suitcase behind her. She didn't dare to look back, afraid that her resolve would falter. Every step away from the life she once thought she could endure felt like another crack in her already shattered heart. What Evelyn didn't know was that inside the mansion, in the dimly lit bedroom they once shared, David had spent the entire night awake. He sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, staring into the empty space she left behind. A hollow emptiness swelled within him, an unfamiliar ache that he had never known before. When he realized she was truly gone, panic seized him. He searched every corner of the house, called her phone repeatedly, and sent people scouring the city for any trace of her. But Evelyn had disappeared without a trace, without a single goodbye, without a single clue to her whereabouts. "Evelyn!" He whispered her name, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence of the mansion. The once lively and bustling estate now felt emptier and colder than ever before. The silence wrapped around every corner, suffocating him, reminding him of the woman who was no longer there. Without her presence, the house seemed devoid of life, reduced to a mere shell of luxury and emptiness. The towering walls, which once exuded power, now felt like prison bars trapping a man with nothing but regret. David had never felt so powerless. He had always been in control of his empire, of people's lives. But now he was at the mercy of a loneliness that gnawed at his very core. Each return to the mansion after a fruitless search weighed heavier on him, dragging him deeper into the abyss of his guilt and longing. He found himself in his office, staring at the empty desk where Evelyn used to quietly place his morning coffee. The soft echoes of her voice, the gentle rustle of paper as she tidied up, had once been background noise. Now they haunted him. The ticking of the wall clock was the only sound that broke the oppressive stillness, a cruel reminder of time slipping through his fingers, time he could never reclaim. Running a trembling hand through his hair, David shut his eyes, trying to chase away the memories that wouldn't leave him alone. Evelyn's tear-filled gaze, the quiver in her voice when she confronted him with the truth, and finally the silhouette of her walking away without a backward glance. Each moment replayed in his mind like a punishment he couldn't escape. The realization that he had lost her, truly lost her, settled like lead in his chest. He had once thought himself unbreakable, believing he could bend Evelyn to his will, but now he saw how wrong he had been. The anger and hatred that had once fueled him had burned away, leaving behind only the smoldering ashes of regret. Nights without sleep took their toll. David wandered the halls like a ghost, moving through rooms she had once inhabited. He ran his fingers along the spines of the books she used to read, remembering the way she would curl up with them late into the night. He could still picture the soft crease of her brows when she came across a difficult passage, or the quiet giggle she let out at something amusing. Every memory was so vivid, yet so painfully distant. Stepping into their bedroom, his eyes landed on the coat she had left behind, still hanging in the closet. A familiar scent of jasmine, her favorite, lingered in the fabric. He reached out, tracing the soft material with his fingers, as if clinging to the last piece of her that remained. A sharp pain twisted in his chest, raw and unrelenting. Sitting on the edge of the bed, his gaze remained fixed on the emptiness beside him. So many nights he had laid there, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, watching over her as she slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. And yet what had he done? He had turned their marriage into a carefully calculated trap, only to realize too late that the woman he sought to destroy had become the one person he couldn't live without. He let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow and laced with self-loathing. "Do you hate me that much, Evelyn? Hate me enough to leave without a single word?" The mansion felt suffocating without her presence. How long had it been since he last heard her soft laughter? Since he last saw the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about the things she loved? Every room echoed with the absence of her warmth, and David finally faced the truth. He missed her, more than he ever thought possible. In the stillness of his solitude, he admitted to himself what he had been too blind to see before. He loved her, not because of revenge, not out of possession or pride, but because she had shown him what it meant to truly care for someone. Her kindness, her resilience, and the quiet strength she carried despite the weight of his cruelty. He had fallen for all of it, and now he feared it was too late. Lowering his head into his hands, his voice cracked as he whispered, "Evelyn, where are you? Please, come back to me." He didn't know how he had let her slip through his grasp, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. If he was given even the slightest chance to make things right, he would move heaven and earth to earn her forgiveness. But did fate still have that chance in store for him, or had he lost her forever? One early morning, as David sat silently in his office, his fingers tightly gripping a photo frame of Evelyn, his personal assistant Thomas entered with a grave expression on his face. "Sir Blackwood, I've found Evelyn." David shot up from his chair immediately, his heart clenching in his chest. "Where is she?" His voice was hoarse from sleepless nights. Thomas hesitated for a moment before handing him a stack of documents. On top was an ultrasound image, two tiny figures growing inside Evelyn's womb. "She's pregnant, sir, and it seems like she doesn't want you to know." David stood frozen, his fingers trembling as he touched the delicate paper, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. A flood of emotions surged through him, happiness, disbelief, and a deep ache. Evelyn was carrying his children, their children, but the fleeting joy was quickly replaced by fear. She had left him, and now perhaps she never wanted to come back. He had hurt her too deeply, and the realization that he might lose the family he never knew he wanted until this moment was suffocating. Without a moment's hesitation, David bolted out of his office. He wouldn't let Evelyn slip away from him forever. David found Evelyn in a small seaside town where she was living in a modest yet cozy little house. She had chosen a life of solitude, far away from the glitz and painful memories of the past. When David arrived, his eyes were immediately drawn to the sight of Evelyn with her heavily pregnant belly, an image that rendered him speechless. Evelyn saw him from a distance. Pain flickered in her eyes, but she quickly turned away as if trying to escape. Yet David wouldn't let her run anymore. "Evelyn!" he called out, his voice filled with desperation. She froze, her hand instinctively resting on her belly, as if shielding the two tiny lives within from the man standing before her. "Why are you here?" Her voice was cold, stripped of the warmth it once held. David took slow steps towards her, his gaze filled with anguish. "I know you're pregnant." He hesitated, his voice breaking. "They're mine, aren't they?" Evelyn clenched her fist tightly, her eyes unwavering. "Number, they are not yours," she said firmly, without hesitation. Her words struck David like a dagger to the heart. He shook his head in disbelief. Evelyn, you can't deny the truth. I know the truth. She let out a bitter laugh, pain evident in her eyes. Truth? Do you want to know the truth, David? The truth is that you used me for revenge. The truth is that you destroyed my family. The truth is that we were never anything more than a deal. David fell silent, unable to refute her words. I don't need you, and neither do the babies. Evelyn cut off any defense he might have had. Just leave me alone. David felt the crushing weight of losing everything. Dropping to his knees before Evelyn, his eyes pleaded with her. Evelyn, I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you, but I won't let you face this alone. I want to be their father. I want to make things right. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. She couldn't bring herself to believe his words, not after everything they had been through. It's too late, David. Her voice was barely a whisper, laden with sorrow. You can't just come back and pretend nothing happened. David closed his eyes and took a deep breath. I'm not pretending. I love you, Evelyn. I love you and our children. Evelyn stared at him, conflict raging in her heart. Part of her wanted to believe him, to give him another chance, but the wounds he inflicted were still raw, haunting her every day. If you can't forgive me, I'll accept that, but please don't deny me the chance to be their father. His voice cracked, his eyes begging for just one chance. Evelyn turned away, hiding the silent tears streaming down her cheeks. They are not your key, she whispered, and David realized he had single-handedly shattered his own happiness. But David refused to give up. No matter how hard she tried to push him away, he was determined to prove that he truly wanted to be a father, to be the husband he should have been all along. This time, he wouldn't leave her alone. David realized that he had to fight to regain Evelyn's trust. He could no longer be just a husband in name only. He had to be her true companion, the father of the 2 children growing inside her. Evelyn was still deeply wounded, but deep down, she knew she couldn't hide the truth forever. After their painful encounter in the small seaside town, David understood that words alone wouldn't be enough to change Evelyn's heart. She had been hurt too deeply by his deception and calculated plans. But he couldn't give up. Despite Evelyn's rejection, David quietly cared for her in his own way. He didn't appear before her, but he watched over her from a distance. He hired people to help repair her house and discreetly paid off the hospital bills she wasn't aware of. When he learned that she was working at a small office to make ends meet, David contacted the director to ensure she had the best possible working environment where no one could make things difficult for her. However, Evelyn had no idea that every morning when she left her house, David was always there, watching her from a black car parked discreetly down the street. His gaze followed her every step, filled with silent longing. He knew she was still angry, still not ready to forgive him, but just seeing her safe every day was enough for him. One evening, as Evelyn returned home looking exhausted, her steps faltering from the subtle pains of pregnancy, David instinctively wanted to rush to her side and support her, but he held back, standing in the shadows, his fists clenched tightly. He silently vowed to himself that he would make things right, no matter what it took. No matter how many times Evelyn rejected his help, David remained patient, always nearby, like an invisible guardian. One stormy evening, Evelyn felt that something was wrong. Intense, sharp pains twisted in her abdomen, filling her with panic. Her trembling hands clung tightly to the edge of the table, sweat beading on her forehead. She collapsed onto the floor, overwhelmed by pain and despair. She bit her lip, struggling to reach for her phone to call an ambulance, but her hands were too weak. In her semi-conscious state, Evelyn murmured her mother's name in a whisper. Fear enveloped her, thinking that she might not make it through, that her children might never get the chance to be born. David, as if sensing something was wrong, rushed to her house the moment his assistant informed him that she hadn't answered her phone all afternoon. When he broke down the door and stepped inside, the sight before him made his blood run cold. Evelyn lay motionless on the floor, clutching her belly, her eyes closed, and her lips pale. Evelyn, he cried, rushing to her side and gathering her into his arms, his voice trembling like never before. For the first time in his life, David felt utter fear. His usual coldness and pride crumbled when he saw the woman he loved fighting for her life in his arms. He immediately took her to the hospital, gripping her hand tightly throughout the entire ride. whispering words of comfort, even though he knew she couldn't hear him. At the hospital, Evelyn was rushed into emergency care. David sat outside, his hands gripping the armrests of the chair, his heart burning with anxiety. He had never felt so helpless before. The weight of his past mistakes pressed heavily on him, tormenting him with every passing second. Hours later, the doctor stepped out with a serious expression. "Her condition is quite critical. We will do our best, but she needs absolute rest. Any further stress could be extremely dangerous for both mother and child." David didn't leave her side for a moment. He sat by Evelyn's hospital bed, holding her fragile hand, his eyes red with worry. When Evelyn finally opened her eyes, confusion and exhaustion clouded her gaze. Seeing David, she instinctively tried to pull her hand away, but the pain restrained her movements. "What are you doing here?" she asked weakly, her voice still filled with resentment. David held her hand tighter, his eyes filled with pain, regret, and profound love. "Evelyn, please, don't push me away anymore." She looked at him, her eyes conflicted, but the pain in her belly prevented her from arguing further. In that moment of vulnerability, when she thought she might not survive, Evelyn let down her guard. She looked directly into David's eyes, tears streaming down her face. "They're your children," she whispered, every word like a dagger piercing her heart. "If I don't make it, please take care of our babies." David was frozen in place. Her words struck him like a knife to the heart. "Evelyn!" he choked out, gripping her hand even tighter. "Don't say that. You're going to be okay." Evelyn shook her head weakly, offering a faint but painful smile. "I've tried so hard to protect them, but I'm scared that I won't be here for them." David buried his face into her hand, his voice trembling with emotion. "I swear, Evelyn, I'll do everything to protect you and our children. Just give me a chance." Evelyn closed her eyes and a tear slipped down her cheek. Outside the hospital window, the rain had finally stopped. The streetlights cast a soft glow over David's face, full of remorse and determination. He knew that if he had another chance, he would never let Evelyn face anything alone again. Dear reader, are you still following this story? Did this story touch your heart? Leave a comment below. At that life and death moment, David realized that his love for Evelyn had surpassed hatred and pride. He was determined to start over, not as a vengeful man, but as someone who truly loved her. But would Evelyn give him a chance? Could her wounds ever heal? And most importantly, could she trust him again? The surgery began under an atmosphere of intense tension that engulfed the entire hospital. Evelyn was wheeled into the operating room in critical condition, her heartbeat weakening and vital signs deteriorating. Outside, David stood frozen, his hands clenched so tightly that they turned white, his eyes never leaving the closed door. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. David had never experienced fear so vividly before. A man who once feared nothing in the business world now found it difficult to breathe, terrified of losing the only things that truly mattered to him. He prayed, something he had never done before, pleading with whatever force above to keep Evelyn and their babies safe. When the light above the operating room finally turned off and the door swung open, the doctor stepped out with a calm yet exhausted expression. David rushed forward, his voice hoarse with anxiety. "How is she? Evelyn, and my children?" The doctor removed his mask and offered a reassuring smile. "The surgery was successful. Mother and babies are safe. Evelyn will need time to recover, but your 2 baby girls are healthy." David felt his entire body collapse in relief. He exhaled deeply, his eyes red-rimmed, leaning against the wall as if the entire world had just been returned to him. He stood silently at the window of the recovery room, gazing inside at Evelyn, lying pale yet peaceful on the hospital bed. Beside her, 2 tiny cribs held their sleeping angels. David stood there for a long time, his eyes locked onto the image of the 3 of them. The worry that had consumed him was gradually replaced by an overwhelming surge of joy, an emotion he had never experienced before. When he was finally allowed into the room, David walked toward the hospital bed, his legs trembling with emotion. Evelyn was still weak, but when she saw him enter, she offered a faint smile, her eyes gentle yet cautious. David said nothing. He bent down and pressed a trembling kiss to her forehead. "Thank you. Thank you for not leaving me alone," he choked, his voice thick with emotion. Evelyn gave him a weak smile and whispered, "I told you, they are your children." David froze, staring at her before turning his gaze to the two tiny figures sleeping peacefully. With shaky hands, he gently lifted one of the babies from the crib. The baby was so small, her soft skin radiating warmth, and her delicate scent filled his heart with an indescribable emotion. Tears rolled down David's face as he gazed at the precious life in his arms. The baby's tiny fingers curled around his, forming an unbreakable bond. "Hello, my little girl," he whispered, his voice hoarse with love. As he held the baby, his eyes never left her tiny face. Evelyn watched him, an indescribable emotion welling up inside her. She had once resented him, once thought of leaving him forever. But in this moment, seeing David weep with happiness, her heart softened. David turned to Evelyn, his eyes glistening with sincerity. "I'm sorry for all the pain I've caused you. I don't deserve you, but I will do everything to make it right for you and our children." Evelyn shook her head, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "Let's leave the past behind, David. For the children, for our future." David squeezed her hand tightly, his heart overflowing with joy. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to have a real family. The small hospital room was filled with warmth and light, a new beginning without hatred or pain, only genuine love and hope for tomorrow. David leaned down, pressing a tender kiss to Evelyn's forehead before looking over at their two little angels. "I promise, Evelyn, I will never let you suffer again." Evelyn smiled softly, her fingers intertwining with his, feeling the warmth and sincerity she now truly believed in. Outside the hospital window, the first rays of dawn began to break through, shining down on a new beginning filled with love and hope. Late in the afternoon, the golden hues of the sunset bathed the small house where Evelyn and their two children lived. She was gently rocking the twins to sleep, her eyes filled with a tender love that only a mother could possess. David stood quietly at the doorway, watching the scene before him, his heart overwhelmed by an indescribable emotion. In the past, he had thought of ruining her life, but now all he wanted was to protect her and their children for the rest of his days. After months of pain and redemption, David knew he was no longer the man he once was. That night, after the babies had drifted into peaceful slumber, David approached Evelyn, his deep blue eyes reflecting nothing but sincerity. He hesitated for a moment before pulling a small box from his pocket. Evelyn froze, looking at him in shock. "Evelyn," he began, his voice deep and steady, but with a noticeable tremor. "I once proposed to you out of hatred, out of selfishness, to take revenge on your mother. But today I stand before you with a completely different heart. I love you, Evelyn. Please give me a chance to love you fully, to build a real family together." Evelyn gazed into his eyes, no longer seeing the cold calculation that once defined him. Instead, there was warmth, a sincere vulnerability that touched her deeply. Tears welled up in her eyes before she could stop them. "David, she whispered, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions. The painful memories of the past still lingered, but so did the moments when he cared for her without hesitation, the sleepless nights he spent by their babies, the way he looked at their daughters with a love so profound it melted her heart. David slowly knelt down, holding her hand tightly, his gaze filled with nothing but devotion. "I don't need you to answer right now, but I want you to know I'll be here, waiting for you, until you believe that my love for you is real." Evelyn looked at the man before her, the man who was once filled with vengeance and bitterness, now humbly asking for a chance with all the sincerity in his heart. She found herself at a loss for words. After that heartfelt proposal, David remained patient, never pressuring Evelyn to give him an immediate answer. He understood that she needed time to trust him again. Day by day, David showed his love through the smallest gestures. He picked Evelyn up from work, took care of their daughters, and shared peaceful moments with her. He was no longer the cold-hearted CEO, but a devoted father and a man who cherished his family above all else. Slowly, Evelyn began to feel the genuine change in him. It wasn't out of obligation, nor out of guilt. It was a pure, selfless love that David had for her and their children. One evening, as David gently rocked their daughters to sleep, his eyes filled with a soft tenderness that Evelyn had never seen before. Standing by the door, she watched him in silence, feeling an unfamiliar yet comforting sense of peace wash over her. She stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but firm. "I agree. Let's start over. For you, for me, and for our children." David froze, unable to believe what he had just heard. He turned to look at her, his eyes brimming with emotion, as if afraid this was just a fleeting dream. "Evelyn, are you sure?" Evelyn nodded, her lips curling into a gentle smile. "I've seen the sincerity in you, David. I believe we can rebuild, as long as you truly cherish this family." David could no longer hold back. He pulled her into a tight embrace, tears of joy streaming down his face. For the first time in his life, he understood the true meaning of happiness. Life after that became more radiant than ever. David was no longer the man consumed by work and revenge. He had transformed into a devoted father and a loving husband who cherished his family above all else. Every morning he woke up early to prepare breakfast for Evelyn and their two daughters. The cheerful laughter that filled their small home each day brought David a warmth he had never known in his past. Evelyn, too, finally felt the true happiness she had long yearned for. She no longer had to struggle alone, because now she had David by her side. Together, they built a happy home, a place where pain no longer existed, only love and trust. One warm afternoon, Evelyn sat by the window, holding their daughters in her arms, watching David bustling around in the kitchen, preparing dinner. A soft smile graced her lips, and her heart filled with gratitude. She turned to him, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "Thank you, David, for loving me and our children wholeheartedly." David stepped closer, gently kissing her forehead and their daughters, his deep voice filled with certainty. "Thank you, Evelyn, for giving me a chance to love you again." And so they finally had a complete family, a home built on love, forgiveness, and understanding. Love can overcome any hatred when people have enough compassion and sincerity. Evelyn and David proved that, no matter how painful the past may be, true love has the power to heal everything if one dares to open their heart. Thank you for following our story. Did this story touch your heart? Leave a comment below. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.